Okay, thank you, Ken. I want to acknowledge the presenters before me, the prayer, the drum group, and Dr. Westesio, Dr. Wilson, and our dignitaries. First of all, maybe I'll tell you a story about Dr. Wilson, Alexander Wilson. Her father is Stan Wilson, also has a PhD. But one of the stories that I always tell about the Wilsons is when Stan Wilson, Alexander Wilson's father, was about 13, 14 years old. He was sitting on a muskrat house in a trap line about this time of the year, a warm sunny day, looking at the horizon and thinking to himself, what's beyond that horizon? So when he got back to camp, he told his father, Charlie, we heard his name earlier on, you know what, Dad, I don't want to be a trapper anymore, he says. I think I want to go to school in the fall. His father was very disappointed, of course, because he wanted his son to be a trapper, but, he went on to get his high school and undergraduate and then the doctorate. How the world changes when you look at the world in a different way sitting on a muskrat house. But I like that story. I like that story about the Wilsons and a very educated family and looking at our world from a new point of view or our former point of view. I should also say that the Prime Minister of Canada, the first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, said, and I paraphrase the words, we have to take the Indian out of the child. That's why we have residential schools. That's why we have reservations. And that started the era of residential schools. I was 6 years old, as my bio said, when I went to residential school, and I spent 9 years in residential school. And you know what? I was institutionalized, so much so that when I got out of grade 9, out of Guy Hill, I was going to go to the high school in Nepal, and I said to myself, because somehow I was a bit smarter and a little rebellious, that I'll never make it there. I'll never make it at Margaret Barber Collegiate. All my friends say so. So I snuck into Cranberry Portage. It was a residential school, something I was familiar with, run by the province of Manitoba, and it was like going from hell to heaven. Because some guys who had a petition going around says, we want to change this, we want to change that. I said, I don't want to sign this. I love it here, I said to myself in Cranberry Portage. And at the same token, when I went to university, I stayed in residence. My friend says, you'll never stay in residence till after Christmas. When I graduated, I went and seen that guy. What was wrong with residence? I said, oh, you're too dumb to see, he told me, or something I had in Cree. But for myself, I think I realized I was institutionalized. That's what I knew. But I used what was done to me in a good way, those bad experiences, to be able to get my education, both in high school and university. But by the time I was 7 years old in residential school, I was no longer lonesome because I had learned to suppress my feelings. I remember when I went and told my story in the independent process, they call it IAP with residential schools, and I got a strap. I don't know why, but I got a strap, and I was able to suppress my feelings. I was crying inside, but on the outside, I wasn't crying. I was smirking. Finally, my hand was swelling up so bad, the teacher stopped. But I looked at the other students, the older boys in my class. I was one of the younger ones there, and they all smiled at me, acknowledged me. You're one of us, You're able to take the strap. It's almost like in prison. In prison, the guy says, if you can take a beating, you're one of us. Because in jail, residential school, if you get into a fight, you got to fight. You can't just lay back and take the beating. You gotta fight back. But that there were similarities in that. So you grew up with dysfunctions. If I go straight into residential schools, that dysfunctions are reflected in our communities, in our communities right now. Alcohol and drug abuse, sex abuse, the violence, lack of respect for authority. Last Christmas, I was driving into town. We were going to do a radio show now, what we call a Christmas hamper drive. And the radio guy says on the radio, what is your best Christmas moment? Text me, he says. Facebook me, phone me. tell me your story. You know, as I was driving, I felt kind of melancholy, and I don't know why I felt like that. And as I walked into the radio station, and I seen a guy, and I realized why I felt like that. Because in my opinion, my best Christmas was just being home with my family, because I realized that, you know, the family is where your love is. And I also knew that there were many students at Guy Hill, where I was at, that didn't go home for Christmas. And there are some that didn't go home for a few years, and there was some that never went home. I see them once in a while. They never went back to their home community. Maybe the odd funeral, that's about it. But they never went back because they said, there's nothing there for me. So those kind of things are there. And there was a guy that died a few years ago. Last year, actually, it was a hockey player out of Atatago Preserve. His name was Fred Sasagamos. And Fred Sasagamos came here he came and talked to our students about 15 years ago, and I had a chance to have lunch with him. He gave me his hockey card. He was the first Aboriginal player to play in the NHL. He played for Chicago Blackhawks. And he says, you know what? It was residential school. The priest made me skate back and forth, learning drills, he says. I became so good, he says, the NHL signed him up. He played there. Didn't play long, but he played there. And he was playing, I remember a story when I was growing up. This guy, Andy Young, told me, he says, Prince Albert hockey team came to play the Paw Huskies here in the Paw. He said Fred Sasagamos was recruited by Prince Albert, because Atatago was just a few miles out of Prince Albert. And they came to play here. The first period, the local indigenous population was cheering for the Huskies. By the third period, they were kind of quiet. By the third period, they were cheering for Fred Sasagamos and Prince Albert. You know, for those guys. I thought it was kind of funny. Of course, the local white people didn't like that. But, you know, in residential school, the abuse they were there, and Jenny Westesigood highlighted some of them very briefly, because she was at the tail end of her presentation. The abuse that was there, the physical abuse, the mental, the sexual, the emotional abuse. But maybe more important, the things that she's talking about, and I wish she had more time to talk about it, the language loss, the cultural loss, the ceremonial loss, the things that we weren't allowed to practice. Not only that, we're not being allowed to speak, but more important, being ashamed of those ceremonies, being ashamed of who you are, and even being ashamed of your own communities, and being ashamed of your parents. One of the Fontaines wrote a book out of Saugeen, I think it was called Broken Circle, and he talked about, by the time he was grade 4, grade 5, he said, I was ashamed of my parents. And, you know, there was many people that I talked about that. Yeah, I felt like that. I was mad at my parents. I thought I was mad at my parents because they sent me to residential school. But I think it was the indoctrination, the brainwashing that the institution had on us, that we were ashamed of who we are. So when they come out, where did they go? You know, there was a movie back in the early 70s. It was filmed here in Nepal, filmed at Guy Hill, called Cold Journey. You know, about a young man that ended up running away and succumbing to hypothermia. He froze. It was called Cold Journey, you know. But, you know, coming out of residential school, who are you? You know, where do you come from? And what do I want to be? So, you know, those things become very difficult. You know, one of the stories that I remember very fondly about residential school was, and it really probably epitomizes what was wrong with it. There was a young man, Alex McCollum from Brochet. He was incidentally the brother of Senator Mary Jane McCollum, and he was caught out in a bush with 3 girls. They had a fire going, and they were sitting around a fire telling stories. And maybe he had a rabbit. Maybe he was cooking a rabbit because he was a good hunter. But anyway, they got caught. And the priest and the people up in charge called that one of the greatest sins that ever happened at Guy Hill. You know, a boy got caught with three people. I mean, three girls in a bush sitting around a fire. Now we see it as something healthy. You know, learning how to communicate, respecting the opposite sex. You know, we look at it now and say, what's wrong with that? Yet it was drilled into us. We were lined up there, and the priest talked to us that it's a big sin to be out in the bush with three girls. Yet all they were doing, when you look at it, sitting around a fire talking. You know, something really healthy, the respect going both ways, from boys to girls and girls to boys. But they were severely punished. I remember that Sunday evening, the girls' hair was all shaved. There were three chairs in front of where it was movie night. Three chairs were reserved for the three girls, and they were walked in late. They covered their faces, and they sat down, and the younger boys were laughing at them. The older boys thought it was disgusting. I met one of those girls 10, 15 years ago in the hospital here in Nepal, and she recognized me. I didn't recognize her. She told me who she was, and she says, I was one of those three girls that sat in front of the gymnasium at movie night, where everybody was laughing at us. My hair was cut. I said, remember that boy that was standing in the chair laughing? Yeah, she said. She called him by name. He said, well, the next day the older boys beat him up, I said, and she had a smile. Revenge, I guess they call it. But you know, that's just how they look at it. But you know I wonder how it affected those girls, how it affected them as young girls, how it affected them as young women and as men. That the kind of how they look at the authorities, how they looked at things that happened there, where we would think things where we now say to boys and girls to respect each other. And I think that little fire in the bush sitting around is a sign of respect. But the authorities at Guy Hill didn't see it that way. Another story I say sometimes is there's one guy, his name was Bill Moraste from Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan. He got his finger got caught in a door, and someone slammed the door and his finger fell off. So the whistle blew and they're ready to line up. They sent Bill Moraste up to the infirmary 3 floors up. He told me later he made it as far as the 2nd floor and he fainted and he had to get help. But we were lining up there and there was a supervisor walking there with that little finger in his hand going like this. This is what happens to you when you play with that door. Don't play in the door. You know, some of us were almost throwing up seeing that finger put right in front of our nose, in front of our faces, in front of our eyes. You know, I guess that was a form of discipline. But for myself, you know, we talk about those stories, and I only want to mention a few. But now as an adult, as it said in my bio, I spend a lot of time in the land. You know, we go to the land, and many schools are doing land-based education, and the land heals. The land heals for people. Look at the big fight they're having in the news right now. I call it a fight. You know, people want to go out and go out camping, and they're asking the province to reserve a camping spot, and they can't get a camping spot. Hey, I find that so I don't know, out of this world. You know, I don't know how I would feel if I couldn't go out in the land. Myself, I got a cabin. I've been going out quite a bit, and you know, it heals you. The land heals you. The fire heals you. All the elements of life, they heal you. By going out the land and by participating in ceremonies, workshops, conferences, I've learned how to hug again. I've learned how to love, to be loved. I learned how to talk. I learned how to express myself, to express my feelings. I can cry now, you know, when I'm hurt, because you're supposed to cry. You're not supposed to hold that feelings inside and hide it, which could be frustrating for your partner if you don't say how you're going to feel. You know, they'll say, don't you care? The 25 years that is mentioned in my bio at Guy Hill, about 1990, 91, we started a gathering of former residential school survivors, I call it, and their families coming. We come out there every August. Sometimes we get money from churches or government. Sometimes we don't. We have a gathering, and it's very, I should say, informal. But it's for our families to know what's going on, what happened to us, and to share that experience. And we do sharing circles. And we were very formal initially, and we said we would heal by our traditions, because the beliefs that you have will give you strength, and they'll help you through life. Whether the belief is through AA, to be a good person, through Christian values, being a Christian, Pentecostal, or whatever, or being a traditionalist. Those strengths you get from your beliefs will get you through life, will get you through school, get you through troubles, and people are healing. And University College of the North and post-secondary institutions must play a part, and we'll be seeing examples of that tomorrow, I think, when we do presentations. And some of the presenters and speakers earlier on, like President Lofted made reference to it, and Melanie Belmore made reference to it. Post-secondary institutions are leading the way. Most of our Indigenous professors, Dr. Westesigo, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Nekaway, they're traditionalists. And our high schools and many high schools here, Oscar Latin College here in Nepal, they really promote the land-based program. They promote the Joe Ross School, the elementary school, promote an immersion program. They do a lot of stuff. They call me in quite a bit. Lately, I've been going in, and we go out in the land and we pick medicines like Wegas, or lately I get bear fat, and we make bear grease, and we talk about stories of the bear, the significance of the bear, the medicine values of the different animals. We learn those things that were taken away from us. Young people, they're craving, they're starving for that kind of information. They're starving for that knowledge. They want to know where they came from. They want to know who they are, so it'll help them know where they want to go. And that's where institutions like University College of the North, University of Saskatchewan, University of Manitoba, are going. There's more and more of that. The movement, I don't know more. Dr. Wilson, we heard earlier on, was one of the founders of that, or her students, I should say, because of what they were seeing in this country, and young people wanted to do something to make this country better, to heal this country, to heal the land that is out there. We'll be hearing subjects like indigenizing the curriculum. Almost all university centers, universities, colleges have Aboriginal centers, and they really help create the family. I see Nelson Leeson, one of the monitors there. He does really good work here in the college, and as well as the staff that are here. We have the elders, at both campuses, which is good. We have an elders council, probably the only elders council in Canada, for any post-secondary institutions. The call to action, and I got the little book here. The call to action that was released in, I think it was 2015, by the three commissioners chaired by Justice Sinclair. The first 5 deal with child welfare, and we'll be hearing Shirley Allaire talk about that. But I think it's very significant, because that's where many of our problems are reflective, because people who were coming out of residential schools, they weren't brought up by loving parents, they were brought up by an institution, and they become very cold, because people, as raise their kids by how they themselves were raised. I remember 15 years ago or that, one of my buddies died in an accident, and there was some rift in the family. And then I was asked by one of the uncles, come and talk to the adult children. I was your best friend that died. So I did. And what I wanted to tell them was, your father was like this because of what he experienced at Guy Hill in residential school. And we told stories. We spent the evening there. Instead of sitting at the wake, we told stories about the father, what happened to him. Finally, one of the kids looked at his dad, who was one of the cousins, says, "Dad, is that why you always hit me on the head when I didn't eat all my food?" Yeah. But the father says, in a quick comeback, "But I don't do that anymore. I broke that cycle. I don't hit you anymore. Because I realize now, I know better that I shouldn't hit you just because you're full. You don't have to eat, the rest of the food. You only eat what you want to eat. That. So it's a learning thing there. We're breaking that cycle, and having like that example of that family meeting that we had there. People didn't know how to be parents, and they're being parents, so they don't know how to do that. So the first 5 calls to actions were on child welfare. The next 7 were in education. And I could probably talk more and more, but it's already 10 minutes to 12. And Ken Biggity says I'm supposed to be finished at 11:45. How just by...
No, keep going.
Oh, yeah. I knew you would say that, Ken. Or is that one of your Muppets talking? I just... Murray St. Clair came here a few times, and we were trying to get him to come out here, but he's kind of retired now. When he was a commissioner for the Truth and Reconciliation, and he became a senator. And he's actually working at child welfare now. He's working with a firm out of Winnipeg called Cochrane Saxburg, and he's working with us here in the Pascrod Cree Nation in making a law under C-92, and Shirley Allaire will be talking about that. I think it's tomorrow, or it's today, I forgot now. But she'll be talking about that because, that's one of the negative byproducts of residential school, as I said. And what we want to do is change the law, change our law in that how could we look after children a lot better? Because the whole premise of the Child and Family Services Act in Manitoba or any other province is apprehension. That's all they think about. It's apprehension based. And we want to change that to, and actually we call it Wawutuin law. Wawutuin law, that's what we call it. So anyways, Judge Barry Wilson said here one time, I think it was at the Kikiwak, he says, education got us into this mess, education will get us out. But in a more formal setting, what he said was, it is precisely because education was the primary tool of oppression of Aboriginal people and miseducation of all Canadians that we have concluded that education holds the key to reconciliation. And at that time, it was Justice Sinclair, and now Senator Sinclair, and now retired Sinclair. But, education is a Cree. And I'm so happy that we have so many educated people, presenting to us with their PhDs, being traditionalists and teaching our people, teaching the rest of the world, teaching the rest of the college and the universities, who we are and where we came from. And with that, Ken Biggity, that's my presentation. I make notes because I probably could ramble all day. That people say that to me about sometimes. You could talk all day. But I wanted to make notes to make it shorter, and I did. Okay. Okay. Ken Biggity, thank you. Ken Biggity also, you went to Guy Hill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went a few years after you. I went first and you came before me.
My oldest brother, Lucian, went and then it cut off there.
Yeah. So I have a strong affinity to Pagadawagan, by the way. I'll tell you another story. My best friends are from Pagadawagan. And, my sister, 30 years ago, became a nurse and says, I think I'll go to Pagadawagan and be a nurse there. He says, I'll try it for one or 2 years. And she's still there.
Yeah.
Leona.
Yeah.
And people asked her, how come you didn't come home? Well, I come home once in a while, but those were my sisters, those are my brothers, and that's what happens in residential schools. The bond is so strong, It's so strong, guys. That's how you see every day. That's how you share your feelings every day. When you get a beating, with the rest. You get strapped with with the rest of the people from Paganawagan. And you know what? I learned so much. One of the things I learned was, you know, being out in the bush. I used to go with the Singlers and Biggities out in the bush, and we set snares. And one of your chums, my chum, Matthias Sinclair, he says, my grandmother showed me how to set snares. So he showed me how his grandmother set snares. And years ago, this elder out in the trap line says to me, you came from university, you probably don't know nothing, he says to me. I just kept quiet because, you know, you're not supposed to talk back, he says. I bet you I can get more rabbits than you. So he gave me 10 snares, he took 10 snares. Next day, I got more rabbits than him. So thanks to the Sinklers from Paganawagan.
It was